A homeless mother inherited an $8 abandoned farmhouse and found a winter already hidden inside its walls. Elias Rusk, who had built claim shanties for 12 Dakota winters and buried his own son to the cold, stood in her kitchen and delivered the verdict. If you stay here tonight with those children and no fuel, you will be warming them once more by morning and then not again. She had 8 cents left after the deed, 2 children too young to walk to town alone, and not one split stick of wood in the shed. On January 12, 1888, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in a single hour and the sky turned black. But 7 weeks earlier, Clara Vangen Halverstatter had never winterized a house, never managed a stove through a blizzard, never even lived alone. She had arrived in Dakota Territory 7 weeks before the cold came, with 2 children, 2 trunks, and $8 left after the deed filing. The brothers had given her until noon, till that was how Leif Halversdatter's kin measured mercy, not in kindness, not in explanation, but in hours. They stood in the dooryard of the farmstead Clara had worked for 6 years, and they told her to be gone by the time the sun crossed the barn roof. Marta, 6 years old, did not understand why her uncles would not look at her. Ole, barely 3, understood nothing except that his mother's hands shook as she packed. Clara's husband had been dead 9 weeks. Pneumonia had taken him after harvest, in that window when the work was done, but the cold had not yet arrived to punish anyone for stopping. He had coughed for 3 days, burned for 2, and then simply stopped breathing in the night. Clara had woken to a body already cooling beside her. The brothers arrived 4 days after the burial. They came with a wagon and a paper. The paper said Leif had owed them money. $62 for a team advance 3 years prior, plus interest they calculated themselves. The paper bore no witness signature, no recorded date, nothing that would hold in a proper court. But Dakota Territory was not a proper court. Dakota Territory was a place where the men who owned the tools made the rules, and Clara owned nothing anymore except what Leif had left in her name alone. They took the wagon team first, then the plow, then the good draft harnesses, the seed stock, the saleable tools. They moved through the farmstead like buyers at a liquidation, touching everything, claiming anything that might fetch money in town. Clara's brother-in-law, Harold, the elder of the two, finally looked at her when they were done loading. "The mercantile has rooms above the store," he said. "Griggs might let you work off a winter's board." "And my children?" "That is your concern now." She had exactly $11.30 when the wagon pulled away. By the time she walked to town, found the land office, and learned there was one property she might afford, she had 8. The clerk was a narrow man with ink-stained fingers and no interest in Clara's situation beyond what was required to process paper. He spread a survey map across his counter and pointed to a rectangle 2.5 miles east of the rail town. "Eldred Moon's claim," he said. "Abandoned 18 months. House still standing, supposedly. Back taxes, filing fees, and deed transfer come to $7.60. That leaves you change for flour." "Why was it abandoned?" The clerk shrugged. "Moon's died. No family came forward. County wants it off the delinquent rolls." "What is the house?" "Frame construction. You will have to see it yourself." Clara signed the papers. She paid the money. She carried her deed 2.5 miles east with her children walking beside her, and everything they still owned divided between their arms. The house was not what she expected. It was worse. The walls still stood. That was the most Clara could say when she first saw it. The frame house rose 1.5 stories against a sky the color of old pewter, its clapboards weathered gray, its windows boarded from outside. No smoke had come from its chimney in 18 months. The woodshed door hung loose on one hinge, swinging in a wind that crossed the open prairie without anything to slow it down. There were no trees. In every direction the land lay flat and brown, the grasses beaten down by autumn, the horizon so distant it made Clara feel exposed in a way she had never felt in the timbered country of her girlhood. This was not a farm. This was a box set down in a void. Marta stopped walking 20 feet from the porch. "Mama," she said, "that is not a house." "It is our house," Clara said. "Help me with the door." The boards came away from the front entry with the squeal of nails pulling from soft pine. Behind them, the door itself was swollen, but not locked. Clara put her shoulder to it and pushed until it gave. Inside, the air smelled of mouse droppings and old dust. Weak light came through gaps in the window boards, drawing pale stripes across a floor covered in chaff and blown debris. The cook stove still stood in what must have been the kitchen, a small cast-iron box with one lid missing and ash caked in the firebox. The stovepipe rose toward the ceiling, passed through a rough tin collar, and disappeared into the loft space above. Clara walked through the rooms while her children stood in the doorway, too uncertain to follow. The main floor held the kitchen, a front room with no furniture, and a narrow bedroom with a straw-tick mattress so mouse-eaten she would have to burn it. A ladder led up to the half-loft where the roof sloped, the space beneath it barely tall enough for a child to stand. She found no food. She found no bedding she could use. She found no tools except a bent poker beside the stove and half a broom. And in the woodshed, she found nothing at all. The walls of the shed were solid enough. The roof mostly held. But the floor where split wood should have been stacked, enough for a winter 6 cords, 7, however much a man alone in Dakota Territory thought he needed, was bare. Clara stood in the doorway of the empty shed and felt the wind push through the gaps in the siding. It was the 23rd of November. She had 8 cents, 2 children, no fuel, and a house she could not heat. This was not survival. This was arithmetic, and the numbers did not work. Elias Rusk arrived the second morning. Clara had spent the first night in the front room, the children wrapped in quilts from their trunks, the stove unlit because there was nothing to burn except the quilts themselves. She had pulled boards from the boarded windows to let in light, then realized the glass behind them was broken in 3 places. The wind had found the gaps by midnight. She was stuffing the holes with rags torn from the mouse-ruined mattress when the man appeared in her dooryard. He was old enough that his beard had gone white at the edges, but he moved like someone who expected his body to obey him. He wore a wool coat that had seen better years and boots caked with dried mud. He did not knock. He simply stood in the open doorway where Clara had removed the boards and looked at her. "You the widow who bought the Moen's place," he said. It was not a question. Clara straightened from her work. "I am." Elias Rusk. He did not extend a hand. "Section boss on the rail line before my knees went. Carpenter since. Built half the claim shanties between here and Jamestown." Clara waited. "I came because Harold Halvorstadter told Griggs at the Mercantile that his brother's wife had taken the Moen's claim, and Griggs told me, and I wanted to see what kind of fool would put children in this house before a winter." His eyes moved past her, taking inventory. The rag-stuffed windows, the cold stove, the empty woodshed visible through the kitchen entry. "You have no fuel," he said. "I know. You have 2 children. I know what I have." Rusk stepped into the house without invitation. He walked through the rooms the way the brothers had walked through her husband's farmstead, assessing, calculating, finding everything insufficient. He rapped his knuckles against the walls, tested the window sashes, pushed at the floorboards with his boot. When he came back to the kitchen, his expression had not changed. "I built claim shanties for 12 Dakota winters," he said. "I buried my son to the cold in '79. I have seen what happens when people underestimate this country." "I'm not underestimating anything." "Then tell me your plan." Clara felt her children watching from the front room. Marta had stopped moving. Ole's thumb was in his mouth. "I have 8 cents, Clara said. "I have no team. I have no way to reach the river timber and no way to haul it back and no time to season it before the cold. I know the math, Mr. Rusk. The math does not give me choices." "The math gives you one choice," Rusk said. "Leave. Go back to town. Tell Griggs you will work for board. Let the county place your children with a family that can feed them until spring. That is the choice the math gives you. That is not a choice. It is the only one that keeps them alive. He moved toward the door. Clara did not step aside. You said you built claim shanties, she said. You said you knew what happens when people underestimate this country. So tell me, how much fuel does this house need? Rusk stopped. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Not pity, not softness, but the recognition of someone who would not be moved. 5 cords, he said. Minimum. 6 or 7 if the winter runs hard. You need dry wood, not green. You need it stacked and accessible and close enough that you do not have to fight drifts to reach it. You need storm windows on every opening and rags in every crack and a stove that draws clean. You have half a stove. You have broken glass. You have not one split stick in that shed. He leaned closer. If you stay here tonight with those children and no fuel, you will be warming them once more by morning and then not again. Clara did not look away. Then I will find fuel. Where? I do not know yet. Rusk shook his head. He stepped around her and walked out into the morning cold. At the edge of the yard, he turned back. The Mickelson place is 2 miles south. Anna Mickelson has 3 children of her own and no extra room, but she will at least tell you where the deadfall is thickest along the creek. If you are still determined to die out here, you might as well die with an axe in your hand. Then he was gone, and Clara was alone with the arithmetic again. She did not sleep the second night either. The children slept, finally, wrapped in every quilt and blanket Clara owned, their bodies pressed together in the narrow bedroom where she had stuffed the worst window gaps with more torn mattress fabric. But Clara sat in the front room with a lamp she could not afford to burn, watching the darkness outside the glass and listening to the wind test every weakness in the walls. The house was dying around her. She could feel it. Every gust found a new crack, a new loose board, a new failure in the structure. The temperature had not yet dropped to killing cold. Rusk had said the real winter was still weeks away, but the house was losing what little warmth her body and the children's bodies could produce. She had to find fuel. Tomorrow. She had to walk to the Mickelson place and beg for information about deadfall, then walk to the creek and haul whatever branches she could carry, then somehow chop and split and dry enough wood to survive a season when she had never done any of those things without Leif beside her. The lamp guttered. Clara turned down the wick to save oil, and in the silence that followed, she heard the wind do something strange. It changed pitch. On the east wall, where the window was boarded, the wind had been making a high, thin whine, air forcing through gaps too small to see. But now, suddenly, the sound shifted. Lower, almost a moan. Clara stood. She crossed to the wall and pressed her palm against the boards. They were warm, not warm the way a house should be warm, not heated, not comfortable, but warmer than the outside air had any right to make them. The interior boards, the tongue-and-groove pine paneling that ran along the north and west walls, felt different under her hand than the bare studs on the south side. Clara thought of something her father had told her years ago in Minnesota when she was 12 years old, and he was teaching her to stack winter wood. A wall can keep out cold twice, he had said, once by being a solid and once by what you put inside it. She had not understood then. Her father had been building a storage bay inside a granary wall, packing it tight with split oak to keep the wood dry and hidden from desperate neighbors who might otherwise help themselves. It had seemed like a miser's trick at the time. Now, standing in an abandoned house in Dakota Territory with 2 children and no fuel, Clara understood. She crossed to the kitchen and found the bent poker she had seen by the stove. She came back to the north wall, chose a seam where 2 tongue-and-groove boards met, and wedged the poker's tip into the crack. She pulled. The board came away with a screech of old nails, and Clara nearly dropped the poker. Behind the paneling, where there should have been open stud space, hollow air, mouse nests, nothing, there was wood. Split wood. Gray-brown oak, dry as bone. The bark brushed off, each piece laid lengthwise in the cavity like merchandise in a lumber yard. Stacked so tight there was no gap between them. Clara reached in and touched it. The surface was cool but not damp. When she rapped her knuckles against it, the sound was hollow and ringing, the sound of wood that had been seasoned for years. She pulled out one piece. It was light for its size, the kind of light that meant the moisture had fled long ago. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the grain, smelling the faint ghost of sawdust and resin. Someone had built this house to hold its own fuel inside its walls. Clara set down the poker. She walked to the west wall and knocked. Hollow near the door, but solid, dense, and packed, along the section farthest from the stove. She crossed to the bedroom and knocked again. More hollow space, more hidden mass. Her heart was pounding now. She went back to the kitchen and pried loose another board from the north wall, this time lower, near the floor. More wood. Different species, hickory, she thought, denser and heavier than the oak, packed just as tight. She worked for an hour. She pulled 6 boards and found fuel behind every one. When she finally stopped, her arms aching, her lamp burning low, she had exposed enough hidden wood to fill a quarter of the empty shed. And she had not even touched the west wall yet. Clara sat on the floor of her ruined kitchen, surrounded by torn paneling and scattered firewood, and began to laugh. Eldred Moines had not abandoned this house. Eldred Moines had prepared it. Anna Mickelson arrived the next afternoon. Clara had built her first fire by then, a small blaze in the cook stove, fed with oak from the north wall, producing more heat than she had felt in days. The stove drew poorly because the pipe needed cleaning, but it drew. Smoke rose. Warmth spread. Marta and Ole sat close to the stove with their hands extended, watching the flames through the gap where the missing lid should have been. Anna came on foot, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her face red from cold and exertion. She was perhaps 5 years older than Clara, with the hard-worn look of a woman who had worked Dakota soil long enough to stop expecting anything easy. She stopped in the doorway and stared at the pile of split wood on the kitchen floor. Where did that come from? Clara pointed to the north wall. Anna looked. She saw the torn paneling, the exposed cavity, the remaining rows of dry timber still packed in the hidden space. God in heaven, she said. Eldred Moines built it this way, Clara said. False walls on the cold sides. Storage bays filled with seasoned wood. How much? I do not know yet. I have only opened part of one wall. Anna walked to the north wall and touched the exposed wood. She knocked on the paneling that remained in place, listening. It goes to the corner, she said, and the west wall sounds the same. I know. Anna turned. Her expression was complicated, disbelief fighting with something harder to name. I have lived 2 miles from this place for 4 years, she said. I have seen it empty. I have seen Moens walk past the mercantile, silent as a post, never saying more than he had to. I thought he was mad. Perhaps he was. Perhaps he was cleverer than any of us. Clara fed another split into the stove. I need to open more of the wall, she said. I need to know how much is there. But if I pull too many boards, I will lose the seal. The room will get colder, not warmer. You're right, Anna said. Every board you remove is a hole in your shell. The wood keeps the cold out even before you burn it. Packed tight like that, it is better than nothing between you and the wind. So I pull one section at a time, take what I need, close what I can. With what? I do not know yet. Anna was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down on a trunk and looked at Clara properly for the first time. "My husband said you were a fool," she said. "He said Rusk went out there and found a dead woman who had not stopped breathing yet." "What do you say?" "I say you found something Moans hid, and I say finding it does not mean you know how to use it." Clara said nothing. "You cannot just burn your house down from the inside," Anna continued. "You need a system. You need to take from the walls in a way that does not wreck them. You need to ration so the supply lasts until spring. You need to keep the access controlled, or every time you reach for fuel, you let in the cold you're trying to escape." "I know. Do you?" "No, but I will learn, or I will die. Those are my only choices now." Anna studied her. Something in Clara's voice, or her stillness, seemed to settle a question the other woman had been carrying. "There is a man named Eide," Anna said finally. "Norwegian, like you, retired carpenter and stove setter. Lives in town but does not stay there winters. He goes out to whatever homestead will have him, fixes things, earns his keep. He's too lame to cut timber but too proud to accept charity. And he knows frame houses better than anyone between here and the Minnesota line. Why would he help me? He would not out of kindness. But he might recognize something in you worth teaching." Anna stood. "His name is Torbjörn, but everyone calls him Toby. Tell him Anna Mickelson sent you. Tell him about the walls." She pulled her shawl tighter. "And if Brenner from the lumberyard hears about this," she said at the door, "do not let him inside. That man has made a living off winter desperation. He will find a way to take what you have found." Then Anna was gone, and Clara was alone again with her children in her hidden wood, and the slow, steady work of learning how not to freeze. Silas Brenner arrived 2 days later. Clara had spent those days opening more of the north wall, carefully, one board at a time. She had discovered the pattern now. Moens had built the storage bays only on the north and west exposures, where the wind hit hardest. The south wall was standard construction, open stud cavities filled with nothing but air and mouse nests. The east wall was mixed, solid near the kitchen where heat from the stove would have reached, hollow elsewhere. She had counted approximately 3 cords of wood accessible so far, and she estimated at least 2 more remained packed in the sections she had not yet opened. 5 cords. Perhaps enough for a hard winter if she rationed. Perhaps not. She had not yet found the carpenter called Eide. She had not yet solved the problem of access, how to reach the wood without destroying the wall that protected her. She had not yet figured out how to close the gap she had made, and the kitchen was noticeably colder now, the cold seeping through the exposed cavity every time the fire burned down. She was working on the west wall when she heard the footsteps on the porch. Brenner did not knock. He stepped through the front door like a man entering property he already owned and looked around the room with undisguised interest. He was younger than Rusk, perhaps early 40s, with the soft hands and clean clothes of someone who spent his days with paper instead of tools. He wore a wool coat that still showed the shop creases and boots too polished for Dakota mud. "Mrs. Halversdatter," he said. Her married name, not her maiden name, a small assertion of knowledge. "I did not invite you in." "The door was open." He smiled. "I am Silas Brenner. I manage the lumberyard accounts and coordinate fuel supply for the settlement. I heard you have taken the Moens place." "I have the deed." "Of course you do. That is not what I came to discuss." He walked past her to the north wall, where the torn paneling exposed the remaining packed timber. He studied it the way a buyer studies livestock. "Fascinating," he said. "Moens was always an odd man. Now I understand why." Clara said nothing. She was aware of Marta watching from the bedroom doorway and Ole standing close to the stove. "You have found quite a cache," Brenner continued. "Seasoned hardwood, by the look of it. Oak and hickory. That is premium fuel, Mrs. Halversdatter, worth considerably more than the $8 you paid for this property. It is not for sale. I did not say it was. He turned, still smiling. But I am curious how you intend to manage it. You have no experience winterizing a house. You have no one to advise you. You have torn open your own walls and created gaps that will cost you more heat than the fuel you extracted will provide. Clara's hands tightened at her sides. What do you want, Mr. Brenner? I want to help. The lumberyard sells paneling, caulk, storm shutters, everything you need to properly enclose this house. We also offer credit terms. Very reasonable for a widow in your circumstances. I cannot afford credit. That is exactly why we offer it. You pay when you can. The interest is modest, and if you should find yourself unable to repay, he shrugged. There are arrangements, labor perhaps, or a lien against the property. Clara looked at him. She saw the calculation behind his eyes. Not cruelty exactly, but the cold assessment of a man who understood that desperation was a commodity. You want this house, she said. I want to help you keep it. But if you cannot, if the winter is too hard, or the fuel runs out, or the children get sick and you must seek shelter elsewhere, then yes, someone will have to manage the property. It might as well be someone who appreciates what Moens built here. Get out! The smile did not waver. Think about it, Mrs. Halversdatter. The offer stands. And when the first real cold comes, when your patchwork repairs fail and your children start to cough, you will know where to find me. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he paused. One more thing. The town talks. People know you're out here with firewood in your walls, like some kind of miser's secret. That wood has value. Others will notice. He touched the brim of his hat. Best to have an ally, someone who can help protect what is yours. Then he was gone. Clara stood in the cold kitchen, her pulse hammering, her children staring at her with wide eyes. Mama, Marta whispered, is he going to take our house? No, Clara said. No one is taking anything. But she knew now what she was facing. It was not just the weather. It was not just the fuel, or the gaps in the walls, or the arithmetic of survival. It was everyone who would benefit from her failure. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had someone offer help that was really a trap? Someone who wanted to profit from your hardest moment? Torbjörn Ida arrived 3 days before the first true cold. Clara had asked about him in town, a quick trip on foot, leaving the children with Anna Mikkelsen, carrying her last eggs to trade for lamp oil and information. The mercantile keeper had pointed her toward a boarding house on the back street, and the boarding house keeper had pointed her toward the livery stable, where a white-haired man was repairing a stall door with movements too careful to be quick. He looked 70, though Anna had said 66. He was thin in the way old Norwegians sometimes were, not starved but pared down, everything unnecessary worn away by decades of work. His left leg dragged slightly when he walked. His hands, spotted with age, still held a chisel with precision. Clara waited until he finished a cut before speaking. My name is Clara Vangen Halvorsdatter. Anna Mikkelsen sent me. He did not turn. I know who you are, the widow with wood in her walls. You have heard. Everyone has heard. Brenner made sure of that. He set down the chisel and finally looked at her. His eyes were pale blue, nearly colorless, and they studied her the way he might study a joint he was about to cut. Brenner says you're tearing your house apart, he said. He says you have no idea what you're doing, and that by Christmas you will be begging for his credit. Brenner says many things. So tell me what is true. Clara told him. She described the false walls, the packed timber, the pattern of storage on the cold exposures. She explained the heat she had gained and the cold she had let in by opening the panels. She admitted she did not know how to ration, how to close access properly, how to keep the gap sealed between retrievals. Ide listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "How dry was the split?" he asked. "Dry enough to ring when I wrapped my knuckles on it." Something changed in his expression, not quite approval, but the absence of dismissal. "Moens was a strange man," he said. "Lived out there alone for years, never took a wife, never joined the church, never spoke more than he had to. People thought he was touched. Now I wonder if he was smarter than the lot of us." "Will you help me?" "Help you do what?" "Survive a Dakota winter in a house you do not understand, with 2 children and no money and half the town waiting for you to fail?" "Yes." "Why should I?" "Because I'm not asking for charity." Clara's voice was steady. "I'm asking for knowledge. I will work for it. I will trade what I have, my labor, my time, a share of the food I can preserve from what I grow next summer. I'm not asking to be saved. I'm asking to learn." Ide studied her again. The silence stretched. "I have not taken a student in 9 years," he said finally. "The last one burned down a claim shanty trying to cure a greenwood stovepipe. He survived. The shanty did not." "I am not here to cure stovepipes. I am here to learn how to use what I already have." That is what he said too. But there was something in Ide's voice that had shifted. He picked up his chisel, examined it, set it down again. "I will come look at the house," he said. "Tomorrow morning, if what you say is true, if Moens really built hidden storage into the wall structure, then there is a system there, a logic. And if you can follow a logic, I can teach you how to work inside it." "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. If I come out there and find you have already ruined the wall integrity, I will leave. I have no interest in teaching someone who breaks their tools before they learn to use them." He turned back to the stall door. "Tomorrow," he said. "Dawn." Dawn came cold and clear, and Torbjörn Ide walked into Clara's kitchen with the unhurried pace of someone who expected to be disappointed. He did not speak at first. He examined the north wall, running his hands along the torn paneling, the exposed timber, the gaps where cold air seeped in. He knocked on the section still closed, listening. He measured the depth of the storage cavity with a length of string. Then he moved to the west wall and repeated the process. Clara watched him work. The children had been fed and dressed, and instructed to stay in the bedroom until called. The stove held a small fire, enough to warm the room but not enough to waste fuel. Finally, Ade straightened. 14 inches, he said. In the deepest sections. Perhaps 16 on the west wall. That is not a casual modification. Moens planned this from the foundation. Can you teach me to use it? I can teach you not to destroy it. He walked to one of the gaps Clara had torn open. You pulled these boards like you were prying freight crates. Look at the edges, splintered, broken. Half of them will never seat properly again. Clara felt heat rise in her face. I did not know. Of course you did not. That is why you sent for me. He crouched beside the gap and examined the frame. Here is what you need to understand. The wall is a system. Moens built it to hold wood and block cold at the same time. The paneling is not just a cover, it is a seal. Every time you break that seal, you let in what you are trying to keep out. So how do I reach the fuel? You build a door. He traced the frame with his finger. A proper access panel, hinged or fitted, so you can open it, take what you need, and close it tight again. One panel per section, small enough to limit exposure, tight enough to keep the draft out when you are not using it. I have no hinges, no hardware. Then you learn to fit boards so tight they do not need hinges. Wood against wood, if the joint is square, will seal better than a sloppy door on $100 hinge. He stood. Show me your stove. Clara led him to the kitchen. I'd examined the cook stove, the missing lid, the ash-caked firebox. He ran his hand along the stovepipe, feeling for heat, then traced it up to where it passed through the ceiling collar. The draw is weak because the pipe is fouled, he said. Carbon buildup in the first elbow. We clean it today. Tomorrow we seal the collar with clay and ash paste, the thimble ring is loose, and you are losing heat through the gap. I did not notice the gap. You would have noticed it in January. By then it would have been too late. He moved to the window, where Clara had stuffed rags into the broken panes. This is adequate for now. By hard cold you will need muslin or greased paper behind the shutters. The rags will freeze solid and crack. Muslin cost money I do not have. Then you use flour sacks, or you tear a sheet into strips and grease them with what you render from salt pork. Or you find another way. The solution is not money. The solution is understanding the problem clearly enough that you can solve it with what you have. Clara absorbed this. It was the first useful thing anyone had told her since she had arrived in this house. The system Moan's built, she said. You said there was a logic to it. What is the logic? Adie sat down on the edge of a trunk. For a moment he looked tired. The logic is this. On the treeless plains, fuel is the hardest problem. You can dig a well. You can hunt game. You can grow crops in soil that has never been turned. But you cannot make wood appear where there are no trees. You have to bring it from somewhere, the river, the railhead, the timber lots 100 miles away. And once you have it, you have to keep it. Keep it from what? From everything. From rot, if it is wet. From theft, if your neighbors are desperate. From snow and ice, if it is stacked outside and winter comes sudden and hard. The family that survives winter best is not always the one with the biggest woodpile. It is the one whose fuel is dry, accessible, and protected. He gestured at the walls. Mons understood this. He built his fuel storage inside his shelter, dry wood, hidden from thieves, unreachable by weather, and the walls themselves, packed tight with dense timber, block wind better than empty stud cavities ever could. Even before you burn the wood, it is working for you. It is insulation, mass, protection. Clara looked at the torn paneling, the exposed cavity, the fuel she had already pulled. I have been treating it like a woodpile, she said. Pull what I need, burn it, pull more. Yes, and you will freeze before Christmas if you continue. Then teach me. Teach me to see it the way Moen saw it. Idie was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small carpenter's pencil worn to a stub. Get me a board, he said. Something flat. We start with the principles. Then we build your access panels. Then we reorganize your fuel by burn rate and establish your rationing pattern. Clara found a board. The teaching began. The first lesson was counting. Not the counting Clara already knew. The arithmetic of money spent and money owed. The calculation of mouths to feed and days until spring. This was different. This was learning to see fuel the way a carpenter sees lumber. In units, in grades, in purpose. Idie drew a rough diagram on the board Clara had brought him. 3 columns, labeled in Norwegian that he translated as he wrote. Daywood, he said, pointing to the first column. This is your maintenance fuel. Oak, if you have it. Burns steady, not too hot, not too fast. You use this when the weather's cold, but not killing. It keeps the room livable without exhausting your supply. He moved to the second column. Nightwood, hickory, denser, burns slower, holds coals longer. You bank this before bed so the fire survives until morning. If you wake to cold ash, you have failed. The third column. Storm wood, the driest hickory you have. The pieces that ring when you knock them. You save this for the worst days, the blizzards, the deep cold, the times when the temperature drops so fast that day wood cannot keep pace. Storm wood is your reserve. You do not touch it unless you must. Clara studied the diagram. How do I know which is which? The wood in the walls all looks the same? It does not. You learn to see the difference. Heidi pulled a split from the pile on the floor and held it up. Look at the grain. Oak runs straight with visible rays crossing the growth rings. Hickory is tighter, the grain almost woven. Feel the weight. Hickory is heavier for the same size. And listen. He rapped his knuckles against the oak. A dull thud. Then he picked up a hickory split and rapped it. The sound was higher, almost musical. Dry wood rings, he said. Wet wood thuds. You will learn to hear the difference without thinking. And the storage? How do I know how much I have? You count. Not in pieces. Pieces vary too much. You count in armloads, and you convert armloads to days. He set the hickory down. 1 armload of oak, burned properly in a stove this size, gives you approximately 4 hours of heat in moderate cold. Call it 6 armloads per day, minimum, when the temperature is above 0. Below 0, you need 8. Below 20 below, you need 10 or more. Clara did the calculation in her head. I have perhaps 5 cords in the walls. That is approximately 40 armloads per cord, depending on how tight you pack. 200 armloads total. At 6 per day, that is 33 days. At 10 per day, that is 20. Winter lasts longer than 20 days. Yes, so you do not burn 10 per day unless you have no choice. You shrink your heated space. You seal every gap. You wear more clothes indoors. You do everything possible to reduce demand before you increase supply. Heidi stood and moved toward the north wall. Show me what you have opened so far. Clara walked him through the sections she had torn. The first gap, where she had discovered the cache. The second, where she had confirmed the pattern continued. The third, where she had found hickory instead of oak. Edie examined each opening, measuring with his eyes, testing the remaining boards for stability. You need 4 access points, he said finally, 1 in each major section of storage. Small, no more than 18 inches wide. You will build fitted covers for each, boards cut to size, and seated so tight they hold by friction alone. When you need fuel, you open one panel, take what you need, and close it immediately. The wall stays sealed except for those few moments. I understand. You understand the principle. The execution will take practice. He turned to face her. We start with the north wall section. I will show you once. Then you will build the second access yourself, and I will tell you everything you did wrong. He was not kind. He was not patient, but he was precise, and precision was what Clara needed. The first access panel took 3 days. Edie showed her how to measure the opening, how to cut a board to fit within a 1/16 of an inch, how to bevel the edges so the cover would seat without binding. He showed her how to test the fit, pushing the board into place, checking for gaps, shaving the edges until light could not pass around it. He did not do the work for her. He demonstrated, explained, and then watched as she repeated each step. When she made a mistake, he told her. When she made the same mistake twice, he made her start over. You are impatient, he said on the second day, when Clara had cracked a board by forcing it before checking the fit. Impatience in carpentry breaks things. Impatience in winter kills people. I have children waiting in the other room. I do not have time to be patient. Then find time, or they will be waiting in a house with holes in the walls when the blizzard comes. Clara bit back her reply. She started over. By the 3rd day, the first access panel was complete. It was not beautiful. The edges showed tool marks, and one corner did not seat as cleanly as Edie would have liked, but it sealed. When Clara pushed it into place and pressed her palm against it, she felt no draft. "Adequate," Idy said. It was the closest he came to praise. "The second access point," Clara said. "Where?" "You choose. Show me you understand the principles." Clara walked the north wall, knocking, listening. She found a section near the corner where the wood sounded densest. Hickory, she thought, based on the pitch. "Here," she said. "Stormwood Reserve. I want access to it without opening the main oak supply." I nodded. "Good reasoning. Now build it." The second panel took 2 days instead of 3. Clara's cuts were cleaner, her measurements more precise. When she finished, Aid tested the seal himself, pressing his palm against the fitted board, checking the edges. "Better," he said. "2 more to go. West wall. You can do them without me watching." "Where will you be?" "Fixing your stove. The draw is still weak, and you're losing a quarter of your heat up the chimney. By the time you finish the access panels, I will have the pipe cleaned and the collar resealed." He moved toward the kitchen without waiting for a response. Clara turned to the west wall and began to measure. The cold arrived in stages. First came the frost, thin ice on the water pail in the mornings, breath visible indoors until the stove caught properly. Clara could manage frost. Frost was an inconvenience, not a threat. Then came the hard freeze in the first week of December. The temperature dropped below 0 and stayed there for 3 days. The wind picked up, finding every weakness in the house's shell, whistling through the gaps Clara had not yet sealed. She burned 6 armloads of oak per day during the hard freeze. Edie had predicted 6. He was right. The stove ran constantly, and the main room stayed livable, though the bedroom grew cold enough that Clara moved the children's bedding into the kitchen. On the 4th day, the temperature rose above 0 again. Clara counted her remaining fuel. 162 armloads, 27 days at 6 per day, 14 days at 10 per day. The winter had barely begun. "You are ahead of the pace I expected," Edie said when she showed him the count. He had taken to staying in the house during the coldest nights, sleeping on a pallet near the stove, claiming his boarding house room was drafty. Clara suspected the truth was different, that he had no money for the boarding house and no other place that would take a lame old carpenter in winter. She did not press. His presence was worth more than pride. "Ahead is not enough," Clara said. "If January brings what everyone says it will bring, I will run out before February." "Then you reduce demand further." "How?" "I have already shrunk to 1 room. I have sealed every gap I can find. I wear every piece of clothing I own." Edie sat down by the stove and stretched his bad leg toward the warmth. "There are things you have not tried," he said. "The heat curtain, for one. You hang a quilt or heavy fabric at the ceiling line, dividing the upper air from the lower. Warm air rises. You trap it where you live instead of letting it collect at the roof peak where it does no good." "I have quilts. I have been using them for bedding." "Then you decide which matters more, bedding or heat. The ceiling curtain can save you an armload per day, maybe more. That is 5 days of fuel by the end of winter." Clara thought of Marta and Ole sleeping under every blanket she owned. "What else?" "The stove itself. You're burning too hot during the day. I have watched you. You pile the firebox full and let it roar until the iron glows. That is waste. A smaller, steadier fire produces more usable heat over time than a large fire that exhausts itself. The room gets cold when the fire burns down. The room gets cold because you let the fire burn down too far before feeding it. You need a rhythm, small fuel, often. Never let the coals go gray. Never let the iron go cold. A hot stove that burns out is worse than a warm stove that holds." Clara absorbed this. She had been treating the fire like a crisis to be solved. Pile on fuel, wait for warmth, pile on more when the warmth faded. Edie was describing something different, a continuous negotiation, a balance maintained hour by hour. "Show me," she said. He did. The rhythm took a week to learn. Clara woke before dawn to check the coals. If they still glowed, she added a small split of oak, not enough to roar, just enough to catch. She waited until the flame steadied, then added a second split. By the time the children woke, the room was warm enough for them to dress without shivering. During the day, she fed the stove every 2 hours, never more than 2 pieces at a time. She learned to read the iron, the color of the surface, the sound of the draft, the smell of the smoke. Too hot meant waste. Too cold meant playing catch-up, burning extra fuel to recover heat she should never have lost. At night, she banked the coals with ash before adding the final hickory splits. Dense, slow-burning, designed to hold until morning. She woke once or twice in the dark to check the fire, adding a small piece if the coals had sunk too far. It was exhausting. It was relentless. But by the end of the week, Clara's fuel consumption had dropped from 6 armloads per day to 5. "Better," Heidi said. "Now the ceiling curtain." She hung her best quilt from nails driven into the ceiling joists, creating a fabric barrier that divided the room's upper air from the space below. The difference was immediate. Warmth pooled around the stove instead of rising to the roof peak. The children stopped complaining that their feet were cold while their faces were hot. 4.5 armloads per day. Clara recounted her supply. 148 armloads remaining. At 4.5 per day, that was 32 days. Still not enough, but closer. Elias Rusk returned in mid-December. The snow had arrived by then, not the heavy killing drifts of deep winter, but a persistent cover that made walking difficult and erased the trails between homesteads. Clara had not seen another person besides Heidi in 5 days. Rusk came on foot, wrapped in a buffalo coat that made him look twice his actual size. He stamped the snow from his boots on the porch and entered the kitchen without knocking. He stopped when he saw the ceiling curtain, the organized fuel stack, the steady glow of the stove. "You are still here," he said. "I am still here." "The children?" "In the bedroom. Warm enough." Rusk walked to the north wall and examined the access panels Clara had built. He ran his fingers along the fitted edges, testing the seals. "Edie's work," he said. "My work. Edie taught me." Rusk grunted. He moved to the west wall and knocked on the paneling, listening. "How much remains?" "Approximately 140 armloads, enough for 30 days at current consumption." "Current consumption? And if January brings what I think January will bring, then I will reduce further, or I will run out." Rusk turned to face her. His expression was complicated, not quite respect, but no longer the contempt he had shown on his first visit. "I have built shanties for 12 winters," he said. "I have seen what kills people and what keeps them alive. Fuel is the first thing, but it is not the only thing." "What else?" "Water. When the temperature drops below 30 below, your water pail will freeze solid in the room, even near the stove. You need water inside the heated zone at all times, not just one pail, but 2 or 3, in rotation so you never go dry." Clara nodded. She had already moved one pail closer to the stove. "Food close at hand. If you have salt pork, flour, dried anything, keep it in the room with you. When the worst cold comes, you will not want to open doors to reach supplies. Every time you open a door, you lose heat you cannot afford." "I have moved the food stocks, most of them." Rusk studied her. "You have listened to Heidi," he said. "That is more than most." "Aid knows what he is doing." 80 is a crippled carpenter with no money and no family and no reason to help anyone except that he cannot stand to watch people make mistakes he could prevent. Rusk pulled his coat tighter. He's also the best I know at keeping a house alive. If he says you have a chance, you have a chance. Does he say that? He has not left. That is his way of saying it. Rusk moved toward the door. The Mickelson place is 2 miles south, he said. Anna's husband cut timber from the river breaks last fall. They have supply. If your walls run dry and you need a place to take the children, I will not need a place. Rusk paused at the threshold. I said the same thing once, about my boy. He did not look back. Do not let pride kill what you are trying to save. Then he was gone, and Clara was alone with the arithmetic again. Christmas came cold and quiet. Clara had saved a small portion of sugar for the occasion, enough to sweeten a batch of flatbread that Marta and Ola devoured as though it were cake. There were no gifts except warmth itself. The house held. The fuel supply stood at 120 armloads. The rhythm continued. Heidi carved a small wooden horse for Ole from a scrap of pine. The boy clutched it through the long afternoon, running it across the floor in patterns only he understood. You have a hand for small work, Clara said, watching Heidi shape a mane with his pocket knife. I have nothing else to do with my hands anymore. He did not look up. The big work is beyond me now. Frames, rafters, heavy timber. My leg will not hold, and my back will not bend, but small things, toys, repairs, fitted joints, those I can still manage. You could teach. I am teaching. I mean others, more than just me. Adie set down the knife. I taught for many years, in Minnesota before I came west. I had a shop in a town called Goodhue, and I took apprentices, young men who wanted to learn the trade. 3 of them, over time. What happened? One burned down a shanty. I told you about him. One went back east when his mother died. The third. Ide paused. The third was good. Very good. He had hands like his eyes could see through the wood to the shape hidden inside. I thought he would surpass me. Where is he now? Dead. 79. The same winter Rusk lost his son. The same blizzard that came so fast people froze within sight of their own doors. Clara said nothing. I stopped teaching after that, Adie said. I stopped most things. I told myself the boy's death was not my fault. He was home with his family, not in my shop, when the storm hit. But I had trained him to think he could survive anything if he planned well enough. And planning was not enough. You are teaching me. You did not give me a choice. Heidi picked up the knife again. You found Mons' walls. You sent for me. You asked questions that had answers. I am a weak man, Mrs. Halverstatter. I cannot resist a question that has an answer. He returned to carving. Besides, he said quietly, you have the children, and the children change the arithmetic. The new year arrived with a hard freeze that lasted 8 days. Clara burned through 25 armloads, more than 3 per day, her highest rate yet. The temperature never rose above 10 below zero. The wind blew constantly, a low moan that infiltrated dreams and made the children cry in their sleep. On the 3rd day, Marta developed a cough. It was not a bad cough, not at first. A tickle in the throat that made her voice hoarse. Clara gave her warm water with a spoonful of honey she had been saving, and the cough subsided. By the 5th day, the cough was worse. Marta woke in the night, gasping, her small chest heaving with the effort to breathe. Clara held her daughter in the dark, while Heidi fed the stove and Ole slept oblivious in the corner. She felt the heat of fever through Marta's nightclothes. It may be nothing, Adie said. Children cough. They recover. And if it is not nothing, then you will need a doctor. The nearest one is in town. 7 miles in this weather on foot with no wagon. I cannot leave her. You cannot help her here either if it becomes serious. Clara pressed her hand to Marta's forehead. The fever was real, but not dangerously high. The cough came in waves, bad for a few minutes, then quiet, then bad again. I will wait, she said. One more day. She did not sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, Marta's fever had broken. The cough lingered for 3 more days, then faded to a rasp, then disappeared entirely. Clara did not know if the honey had helped, or the warmth, or simply time. She did not care. Her daughter was breathing clearly again, and that was enough. But the scare had cost her. She recounted the fuel supply: 91 armloads, 14 days at 6 per day, 9 days at 10 per day. It was January 6th. Winter had at least 2 months left to run. We need more fuel, Clara said. Adie looked at her. There is more fuel in the walls. I have opened all the sections that Moance filled. The south wall is empty. The east wall is empty except near the kitchen. Have you checked the floor? Clara stared at him. The floor? Moance built storage into the walls. A man that careful might have built storage into other places as well. Raised floors with cavities beneath, false bottoms in closets or pantries. Did you check? She had not checked. The next 3 hours, Clara and Idie worked through the house, tapping and listening. The main floor was solid, no hidden cavities, no raised sections. The pantry was bare, but in the corner of the bedroom, beneath a layer of packed dirt that had accumulated from years of disuse, they found a trapdoor. It was small, barely 2 feet square. The edges were nearly invisible, cut to match the floorboards so precisely that only the sound gave it away, hollow where the rest was solid. Adie pried it open with a chisel. Below, in a shallow crawl space, perhaps 18 inches deep, lay another cache. Not wood this time, wooden crates sealed with wax. Clara reached down and pulled one out. It was heavy, much heavier than its size suggested. She pried the lid loose. Salt pork. 3 slabs wrapped in waxed cloth, perfectly preserved. The second crate held dried beans. Pounds and pounds of them, enough for weeks of meals. The third crate held candles. Real tallow candles, 24 of them, more light than Clara had expected to see until spring. And at the bottom of the crawl space, wedged against the foundation stone, there were 4 bundles of kindling, thin splits of fat wood, resinous and dry, perfect for starting fires in the coldest weather. Moance, Idie said quietly. What were you preparing for? Clara sat back on her heels, surrounded by supplies she had not known existed. Not a blizzard, she said. Not one winter. This is preparation for something much worse. This is what a man stores when he believes no help will ever come. She looked at the salt pork, the beans, the candles. What did he think was going to happen? Does it matter? Idie closed the trap door. He is dead, and you are alive, and whatever he feared did not arrive in time to test it. What matters now is that you have food and light and kindling you did not have an hour ago. Clara nodded slowly. The fuel supply is still short. Yes, but you can survive longer on short fuel if you are not also short on food. One problem at a time, Mrs. Halverstatter. That is how you live through winter. The thaw came on January 10th. Clara felt it before she saw it, a softening in the air, a stillness in the wind. When she stepped outside for the first time in days, the temperature was above freezing. Water dripped from the icicles along the eaves. The snow on the ground grew heavy and wet. Chinook wind, Adie said, standing in the dooryard with his coat unbuttoned. Warm air from the mountains. It happens sometimes in winter. The old-timers call it a false spring. False? It never lasts. The cold will return, but for a few days the land breathes. He looked west, where the sky was hazy and pale. Enjoy it. Let the children play outside. Dry your bedding in the sun if there is sun. Do the work you have been putting off. Clara let the children out. They ran in the wet snow, screaming with joy, their faces red from cold and exertion. Ole threw snowballs that disintegrated before they reached their targets. Marta built a lopsided snowman that sagged within hours. For the first time in weeks, the house felt less like a prison. Anna Mickelson appeared in the early afternoon, walking across the softening prairie with a basket over her arm. "The warm spell," she said by way of greeting. "I thought I would come while I could." She had brought eggs, real eggs, from chickens she had somehow kept alive through the freeze. "You cannot afford to give these away," Clara said. "I am not giving, I am trading. You have something I want." "What?" "Knowledge." Anna set the basket on the kitchen table. "Edie taught you the wall system, the access panels, the fuel rationing, the stove rhythm. My husband thinks I'm foolish, but I want to learn. Our woodshed is exposed. Every storm, the snow drifts against it, and the wood gets wet. Every thaw, it freezes solid again. We have lost a quarter of our supply to ice damage already this winter. You want to build hidden storage? I want to understand the principle. Then I want to build something that works for our house, even if it is different from yours." Clara looked at Edie. He shrugged. "Teacher," he said, "that is what knowledge is for." For the next 2 hours, Clara walked Anna through the system, the counting, the grading, the access panels, the rhythm. Anna asked questions, sharp, practical questions, and took notes on a scrap of paper she had brought. "You could build a small storage bay inside your shed," Clara said finally, "against the north wall. Line it with salvaged boards and pack it tight. Even if the outer shed floods with snow, the inner cache stays dry." "And the access?" "Fitted panel, tight seal. You open it, take what you need, close it immediately." Anna nodded slowly. "My husband will think I am mad." "Perhaps, but he will think you are less mad when his fingers do not freeze, reaching for wet wood in a blizzard." Anna gathered her notes. At the door, she paused. "The warm spell will not last," she said. "Everyone is saying so. Something is building in the west, something big. Aide said the same thing. Then use the time you have." Anna pulled her shawl tight. "And thank you for the teaching." She walked out into the soft afternoon, and Clara returned to the stove. The morning of January 12th dawned warm and calm. Clara woke to sunlight for the first time in weeks. The temperature outside was above freezing, impossibly wonderfully warm. The children begged to play outside again, and she let them, bundled in coats they did not need. Ade was uneasy. "It should not be this warm," he said, watching the children from the porch. "Not in January, not after the freeze we just had." "You said it was a chinook, a false spring." "False springs do not last 4 days. This is something else." He looked west, where the sky was pale and featureless. "I do not like it. The air feels wrong." Clara did not know what wrong air felt like. She only knew that her children were laughing, that the house was holding, that for one morning she did not have to count armloads and calculate days. Then, just after noon, the wind shifted. It came from the northwest, sudden and hard. One moment the air was still. The next, it was moving, not a breeze but a wall, a pressure that Clara felt before she heard it. The children stopped playing. "Mama," Marta said, "the sky is changing." Clara looked west. The pale haze was gone. In its place, rolling across the prairie with impossible speed, was a black wall. Not clouds, not rain, something denser, heavier, a mass of darkness that swallowed the horizon as she watched. "Inside," Clara said. "Inside now." She grabbed Ole and pushed Marta toward the porch. The wind was already rising, carrying a cold that cut through her coat like it was not there. Ide was at the door, his face pale. "It is here," he said. "God help us. It is here." The temperature dropped 40 degrees in the first hour. Clara did not have a thermometer, but she did not need one. The cold was a physical presence, a weight that pressed against the walls of the house and sought every crack, every gap, every weakness. The warmth of the morning vanished as though it had never existed. The wind rose to a scream. Visibility dropped to nothing. Clara looked out the window and saw only white, not snow falling, but snow driven horizontal, a blur so complete that the woodshed 20 feet away had ceased to exist. "Blizzard," Ide said. He was already moving, his lame leg forgotten. "True blizzard. I've seen 2 in my life. This is the 3rd. What do we do?" "What you have prepared for. Shrink the space. Keep the fire. Do not open the door for any reason." Clara pulled the children into the kitchen. She sealed the bedroom doorway with the quilt she had been using for the ceiling curtain, reducing their world to one room. She checked the access panels on the north wall, tight, sealed, holding. "How long?" she asked. "Hours. Maybe a day. Maybe more. There's no way to know." Clara opened the nearest access panel and pulled hickory. Stormwood. The driest, densest fuel she had. The fire in the stove roared. Outside, the world was ending. By 3 o'clock, Ole was crying. The sound was constant, a low, frightened wail that nothing could stop. Clara held him, rocked him, whispered words she did not believe. The wind was too loud. The walls shook with every gust. The cold crept through cracks she had thought were sealed. "The north corner," Edie said, pointing. "Ice is forming on the inside boards." Clara looked. A thin film of white frost was spreading across the paneling, exactly where the hidden wood should have been providing insulation. "The temperature outside must be below 30 below," Ide said. "Perhaps 40. Cold enough to freeze through the wall itself." "What do we do?" "Nothing. The wall will hold or it will not. If the wood in the cavity freezes, it freezes. It will still burn when we need it. What matters is the room temperature. As long as the stove holds and the seal holds, we survive." Clara fed the fire. By 5 o'clock, it was dark. Not the ordinary dark of winter evening, a darkness so complete that Clara could not see the window from the stove. The blizzard had swallowed the sun hours early, and what remained was blackness punctuated by the howling of wind. She lit one of Moans's candles. The flame wavered in the drafts that found their way through the walls. The children were quiet now, exhausted by fear. Marta sat with her arms around Ole, both of them wrapped in every blanket Clara had. Ide sat near the stove, feeding it, maintaining the rhythm even as the world outside tore itself apart. "The Mickelsons," Clara said. "Anna, her children. They have a solid house. Arna knows winter. Their woodshed is exposed. Anna said, there is nothing you can do for them, nothing anyone can do for anyone in this." Edie's voice was flat. "Every house is an island now. Every family is alone. That is what blizzards mean." Clara looked at the walls of her kitchen, the tongue and groove paneling, the hidden bays of fuel, the system that Moens had built and she had learned to use. "He knew," she said. "Moens. He knew something like this would come. That is why he built the fuel inside. Perhaps. If we had to go outside for wood, we would already be dead, or we would be dying, forcing ourselves out into the white to bring back fuel that would be frozen and wet and useless. Edie looked at her. Every log you need is already here, already dry, already inside the space you are defending. That is why you will survive this night and others will not. The wind screamed. Clara fed the fire. At 8 o'clock, someone knocked on the door. Clara thought she had imagined it at first. The wind was so loud, the walls so battered, that any sound could have been anything. But then it came again, 3 impacts, weak but deliberate. "Someone is outside," she said. Ide looked at her. "If you open that door, you lose half your heat." "Someone is dying outside my door." She moved before he could stop her. She grabbed the door handle and pulled. The wind nearly ripped the door from her hands. Snow blasted into the kitchen, covering the floor, extinguishing the candle, driving ice into Clara's face like needles. In the doorway, collapsed against the frame, was a boy. He was perhaps 15, dressed in a coat too thin for the weather, his face white with cold, his hands clawed and frozen. He could not speak. He could not move. Clara grabbed him and pulled. Adie was there, pushing against the door, fighting the wind. Clara dragged the boy across the threshold and into the kitchen. Adie slammed the door and braced it with his body. The cold that had entered with the boy filled the room. "The fire," Clara said. "Feed the fire." Adie moved to the stove. Clara pulled the boy closer to the heat, stripping off his frozen coat, rubbing his hands between hers. "Marta," she said, "the blanket, the warmest one." Marta moved, pulling a quilt from the pile and draping it over the boy's shoulders. His eyes were open but unfocused. Ice crystals clung to his eyebrows and lashes. His breath came in shallow gasps. "Who are you?" Clara asked. "Where did you come from?" The boy could not answer. His mouth moved, but no sound came. "He was trying to reach the Mickelson place," Idie said. "He must have been caught in the open when the storm hit." "From where?" "Does it matter?" "He was walking when the blizzard came. He has been walking for hours in this. The fact that he is alive at all." Idie stopped. Clara looked at him. "The fact that he is alive at all is impossible," Idie finished quietly. "He should have died within an hour of the temperature dropping. He should have frozen within sight of wherever he started. But he found us. He found your door. That is not the same as finding safety. Look at his hands." Clara looked. The boy's fingers were white, the skin waxy and stiff. Frostbite, severe frostbite. "He may lose them," Idie said, "even if we save him tonight." Clara looked at her children, huddled in the corner, terrified. She looked at the frost spreading on the walls. She looked at the fire in the stove, burning through her storm wood at a rate she could not sustain. "We save him tonight," she said. "The rest we cannot control." She pulled the boy closer to the heat and began rubbing warmth into his hands. "If you are still with this story, if you need to know whether Clara's walls hold, whether this boy survives the night, whether anyone can live through a storm this violent, subscribe now, because what happens in the next hours will test everything she has built." The boy's name was Peter. He told them this around midnight when his voice finally returned. His full name was Peter Lindqvist, and he was 14, and he had been walking from a farmstead 3 miles south when the sky turned black. "I was bringing a message," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "For the Mickelsons, about their aunt in town. She is sick." "You walked 3 miles in this?" "I walked 2 miles before it started. Then the wind came and I could not see. I walked into it for I do not know how long. Then I saw a shape, a building. This building. I did not know what it was. I only knew it was a wall." He looked at Clara. "I knocked because I could not open the door myself. I knocked until someone answered." "You are lucky to be alive." I do not feel lucky. He looked at his hands, still wrapped in Clara's warmest cloth. The color had not returned. The fingers remained white and stiff. What is wrong with them? Clara did not answer. The fire burned all night. Clara fed it every hour, opening the access panel, pulling storm wood, closing the panel immediately. The rhythm was automatic now, ingrained so deeply that she could do it in near darkness, guided by the sound of her own heartbeat and the steady roar of the wind. By 2 a.m, the frost on the interior walls had spread to cover most of the north side. The temperature inside the room had dropped despite the fire, not dangerously, not yet, but enough that breath was visible, that water froze in the pail if she set it more than 3 feet from the stove. Edie stayed awake with her, taking turns at the fire, watching the children and the boy. How much fuel remains? He asked. 63 armloads. At this rate, 2 days, perhaps less. Then we pray the blizzard breaks tomorrow. And if it does not? Then we burn everything, the furniture, the boards, the house itself if we must. He looked at her. But we do not stop. We do not give up. We keep the fire burning until there is nothing left to burn. Clara nodded. Outside, the wind screamed on. Dawn came invisible. Clara knew it was morning only because her body told her so. The darkness outside the window had not changed. The wind had not lessened. The cold had not relented. But the children were awake, and they needed to eat. She opened one of Mones's salt pork crates. She cut slices thin enough to stretch the supply. She fried them in the pan she had brought from the old farmstead, the one thing she had refused to surrender to the brothers. The smell of cooking meat filled the kitchen. For one moment, the blizzard outside seemed distant, a problem that belonged to some other world, some other woman's life. Then Ole started coughing. The cough was not like Marta's had been. Marta's cough had been dry, a tickle that came and went. Ole's cough was deep, wet, rattling in his small chest like something trapped. Clara felt his forehead. Fever. Not high yet, but rising. It is the cold, Ide said. And the fear. Children's bodies weaken when they are frightened for too long. What do I do? Keep him warm. Keep him fed. Wait. I cannot wait. He is 3 years old. He is your son, and you will do what you can, and that is all anyone does. Ide's voice was gentle. I have seen this before. Sometimes children get worse. Sometimes they get better. You cannot control it. You can only control what you control. Clara wrapped Ole in blankets and held him close to the stove. His cough rattled on. By noon, the blizzard began to ease. It did not stop. The wind still howled. The snow still fell, but something changed. The worst of the screaming faded. The pressure against the walls relented slightly. Through the window, Clara thought she could see shapes again, the outline of the woodshed, the suggestion of ground. It is passing, Ide said. Thank God it is passing. How long until it stops? Hours, maybe half a day. The center has moved through. What remains is the tail. Clara looked at her son, wrapped in blankets, his small body shaking with each cough. Can we reach town? A doctor? Not yet. Not until the wind dies completely and the drifts settle. Tomorrow, perhaps, if the temperature rises. Tomorrow may be too late. Today is certainly too late. If you go out there now, you die, and your son dies, and your daughter is left alone with a crippled old man and a half-frozen boy. Adi's voice was firm. You wait. You keep the fire. You do what you can. Clara wanted to scream. She wanted to tear open the door and run into the white until she found a doctor or died trying. Instead, she fed the fire. She held her son. She waited. The blizzard broke at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. One moment the wind was still roaring. The next, It simply stopped. The silence was so sudden, so complete, that Clara's ears rang with it. She went to the window and looked out. The world had changed. Snow covered everything, not inches, but feet. The woodshed was buried to the eaves. The ground had vanished beneath drifts that rose and fell like waves frozen in place. The sky above was clear and pale, the sun already sinking toward the western horizon. And everywhere Clara looked, the snow was unbroken. No footprints, no tracks, no sign that anything alive had moved through this landscape in the past 24 hours. "It is over," she said. "The storm is over," Ide corrected. "The aftermath is just beginning." Elias Rusk arrived at noon the following day. He came on foot, wading through drifts that reached his waist in places. His face was red with cold and effort, and he stopped at Clara's door without speaking, simply breathing, simply staring. "You survived," he said finally. "We survived." The walls held. The walls held. The fuel held. Everything held. Rusk looked past her into the kitchen. He saw the children. He saw the boy, Peter, still wrapped in blankets, his hands bandaged. He saw Ide slumped by the stove, exhausted. "How many dead?" Clara asked. Rusk was silent for a long moment. "We do not know yet. The roads are impassable. The outlying homesteads, we cannot reach them. But the children's school in town—" He stopped. "The teacher sent them home when the storm first hit, before anyone understood how bad it would be. Sent them home, into the open, in the first minutes of the blizzard." His voice was flat. "Some made it, some did not." Clara thought of Marta, of Ole, of the door she had almost not opened when Peter knocked. "How many?" "We do not know. We may never know." Rusk looked at her. "But I know this. Everyone who survived had fuel they did not have to fight the storm to reach. Everyone who died was trying to get somewhere, to a woodshed, to a barn, to a neighbor's house. The storm killed the people who had to move. It spared the people who could stay still." He touched the door frame. "Your walls saved you. Moens's walls. Whatever he was afraid of, whatever he was preparing for, this is what saved you." Clara said nothing. There was nothing to say. Rusk turned to leave. "The boy!" Clara called after him. "Peter, his hands." "I will send word to town. Someone will come for him when the road's clear." Rusk paused. "He may lose the fingers, but he will not lose his life. That is more than many can say today." He walked out into the snow, and Clara closed the door. The aftermath of the children's blizzard of January 1888 would not be fully known for weeks. Hundreds dead across the plains, school children frozen within sight of their homes, ranchers lost between house and barn, entire families found locked in each other's arms, waiting for a rescue that never came. Clara did not know these numbers yet. She knew only what she could see: her children alive, her house standing, her fuel supply depleted but not exhausted. She counted the remaining armloads that evening: 31. Enough for a week at crisis consumption rates, enough to survive until the weather moderated. She had made it through the worst. But she knew, as she looked at the frost-scarred walls, the exhausted faces of her family, the bandaged hands of a boy who had knocked on her door at the edge of death, that survival was not an ending, it was a beginning. The days after the blizzard moved slowly, heavy with grief that was not Clara's own, but pressed against her nonetheless. Word came in pieces. A rider from town on the 3rd day, listing names. A neighbor walking the drifts on the 5th, adding to the count. By the end of the week, the shape of the disaster was clear. 235 dead across the Dakota and Nebraska territories. Children, mostly. Children sent home from school into the teeth of a storm no one had predicted. Clara's children were alive. That fact sat in her chest like a stone, too heavy to carry, impossible to set down. Elias Rusk returned on the 8th day after the blizzard. The roads had cleared enough for wagon travel, though drifts still blocked the lower ground and ice made every surface treacherous. He came alone, walking the last quarter-mile from where his horse had balked at a frozen creek crossing. Clara saw him coming from the window and met him at the door. "The boy," she said. "Peter. Did someone come for him?" "His father arrived yesterday. Took him back to their place south of here." Rusk paused. The doctor in town looked at the hands. "He will lose 3 fingers on the left, 2 on the right. But he will live." Clara absorbed this. 5 fingers. A boy who had knocked on her door because he could not open it himself. "Why are you here, Mr. Rusk?" He did not answer immediately. He stood on her porch, his breath steaming in the cold, his eyes moving across the house, the sealed windows, the intact walls, the thin curl of smoke from the chimney. "I came to see it," he said finally. "What you built, what saved you." "I did not build it. Eldred Moons built it." "Moons built the storage. You learned to use it." He met her eyes. "There is a difference. Half the homesteads on this plain had fuel when the storm hit. Most of them could not reach it. The ones who died had woodsheds full of timber they could not touch because the distance between house and shed became a killing ground." "I know." "You know because you survived. I want to know how." Clara studied him, the man who had told her she would warm her children once more and then not again, the man who had predicted her death with the certainty of someone reading weather signs. "Come inside," she said. "I will show you." The tour took an hour. Clara walked Rusk through every element of the system, the hidden wall bays, the access panels, the fuel grating, the rationing rhythm. She showed him the hickory she had burned through the worst of the blizzard, and the oak she had saved for the days after. She demonstrated the fitted panels, pressing them into place, showing how the seal held tight against the draft. Rusk listened without interrupting. He knocked on walls. He tested seals. He counted armloads with his eyes. When they returned to the kitchen, he sat down heavily on the trunk by the stove. "I have been building houses for 30 years, he said. "Claim shanties, proper homesteads, everything between. I have seen men freeze in buildings I constructed because they could not keep fuel dry or close. I have buried my own son to the cold." He looked at her. "I never thought to put the fuel inside the walls." "Neither did I. Mons thought of it." "Mons is dead. You are not." Rusk leaned forward. "I told you to leave. I told you this house was a coffin. I was wrong." The words hung in the air. "I judged the house by the yard," Rusk continued. "I saw the empty woodshed and the broken windows and the woman with 2 children and no money, and I calculated the outcome. I have made that calculation 100 times, and I have almost never been wrong." Almost. He stood. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Halvorsdatter. Not for the warning. A warning is just information. But for the certainty. For the assumption that I understood your situation better than you did." Clara said nothing. "I would like to learn the system," Rusk said. "Not to use it myself. My house is sound, and I have supply enough. But to teach others. The men who come to me for shanty plans, the families starting new claims. If I can show them what Mons built, what you survived, perhaps fewer people will die. Perhaps." Clara looked at the walls of her kitchen, the tongue and groove paneling that had hidden fuel enough to survive the worst blizzard in a generation, the access panel she had built with her own hands under Edie's instruction. "I will teach you," she said. "But not just you. Anyone who wants to learn. Anyone who will listen." Rusk nodded slowly. That is more than I would have offered, he said, if our positions were reversed. I know. That is why I'm offering it. Anna Mikkelsen came the next afternoon. She brought her husband, Arn, a thick-shouldered man with suspicious eyes and hands that had clearly spent decades gripping tools. He said nothing as Anna led him through Clara's kitchen, pointing out the access panels, the fuel organization, the ceiling curtain that trapped heat in the living space. She survived the blizzard, Anna said. The whole thing. Never opened the outer door once for fuel. Arne grunted. He walked to the north wall and rapped his knuckles against it. How deep? 14 inches in most sections, Clara said. 16 on the west wall. And the weight? The frame can carry this? Moens built it to carry it. The joists are doubled where the bays are deepest. Arne was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his wife. You were right, he said. The word seemed to cost him something. This is not madness. This is... He searched for the word. This is sense, hard sense, for hard country. Anna's expression did not change, but something in her posture relaxed. Can we build one? She asked Clara. A storage bay in our shed? Arne knows framing. I know the principles you taught me, but we would need help with the details. Ade can help. He knows the clearances, the load calculations. He can tell you what your frame will carry. And you? Clara looked at her children playing quietly in the corner, at the stove holding steady heat, at the walls that had kept them alive. I will help however I can, she said, but I am still learning myself. Edie is the teacher. I am just the proof that teaching works. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. Neighbors came. Some had lost fuel to the blizzard, wet, frozen, inaccessible. Some had simply heard the stories and wanted to see for themselves. They stood in Clara's kitchen and looked at her walls with expressions that ranged from skepticism to wonder. Clara showed each of them the same things: the hidden bays, the access panels, the grading system, the rationing rhythm. She answered questions until she ran out of answers, and then she sent them to Idie. Idie, for his part, had recovered from the blizzard's exhaustion and thrown himself into teaching with an energy Clara had not seen before. He drew diagrams on boards and scraps of paper. He walked homesteads and calculated loads. He showed men how to frame storage bays that would not collapse their walls, and women how to organize fuel so the rhythm became automatic. You enjoy this, Clara said one evening after a family from 4 miles north had finally left with pages of notes and promises to return. I enjoy being useful. Idie sat by the stove, his bad legs stretched toward the warmth. For 9 years I have been a crippled carpenter who could not carry a beam or drive a post. I have been charity, even when I paid my way. Now I am something else. What are you? A teacher. Again. He smiled and the expression softened his weathered face. I had forgotten what it felt like to pass something on, to watch someone else see what I see. Clara understood. She had felt the same thing when Anna Mikkelsen took notes in her kitchen, the strange satisfaction of knowledge leaving her hands and taking root in someone else. We should organize it, she said. The teaching. Not just whoever wanders in, but a proper system. Gather people before the next winter. Show them together so they can help each other. A school? Not exactly. More like... She searched for the word. A preparation. A getting ready together. Edie nodded slowly. The church in town has a gathering hall, he said. I know the pastor. If we asked, he might let us use it for a day. Would people come? After what happened in January, after 200 children froze because no one was prepared? Idie looked at her. They will come. The question is whether we have anything worth teaching them. We have your knowledge, and your walls, and your survival. He stood, steadying himself on the edge of the stove. We will ask the pastor tomorrow. If he says yes, we begin planning. The gathering happened in early March. 23 people came to the church hall that first day. Farmers, their wives, a few older children. They sat on benches and looked at Clara and Edie with expressions that mixed hope with skepticism. Edie spoke first. He explained the principles: fuel inside the heated envelope, controlled access, grading by burn rate, rationing by day count instead of feel. He drew diagrams on a slate board borrowed from the schoolhouse. He used numbers, armloads, hours, temperatures to make the abstractions concrete. Then Clara spoke. She told them about the blizzard, about the darkness, the screaming wind, the frost spreading on the interior walls, about Ole's cough in Peter's hands, and the moment she had to decide whether to open the door. Every log I needed was already inside, she said. That is why we survived. Not because I was stronger or smarter or braver than anyone who died. Because when the storm came, I did not have to fight it to keep my family warm. The room was silent. I cannot promise that what I built will work for everyone, Clara continued. Every house is different. Every family has different resources, but the principle is the same. Prepare the fuel before you need it. Store it where the weather cannot reach it. Ration it so it lasts. That is all I know. That is all any of us can do. Questions came. How to frame the storage bays. Where to place the access panels. How to grade fuel without experience. What to do when the supply ran low. Clara and Edie answered what they could. When they could not answer, they said so. By the end of the day, 11 families had committed to building some version of the system before the next winter. 3 others said they would think about it. The rest left without comment, their faces unreadable. 11, Clara said, walking home with Edie in the late afternoon light. 11 families who might survive next January because they listened. 11 families who said they would build. Saying and building are different things. You do not trust them. I trust them to intend what they say. I do not trust them to follow through when summer comes and the work is hard and winter feels far away. Edie walked in silence for a moment. But some will, enough will, and that is more than nothing. Clara looked at the prairie around them, the snow still clinging in the low places, the first hints of brown grass showing where the drifts had melted. Spring was coming, summer after that, another fall, another winter. We will check on them, she said, in the autumn before the cold comes. We will visit and see what they have built and help fix what is broken. We? You and I, together. Edie was quiet for a long moment. I have not had a partner in a long time, he said finally. Not since Goodhue. Not since the boy who froze. I am not your apprentice. No, you are not. He looked at her. You are something else. I have not decided what yet. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence. Silas Brenner came to Clara's house in late March. The snow was mostly gone by then, leaving behind mud and the first green shoots of prairie grass. Clara was outside, clearing debris from the winter, when she saw him approaching on foot from the direction of town. He walked slowly, as if each step cost him something. His fine coat was spattered with mud. His polished boots had lost their shine. Clara waited by the door. Mrs. Halversdatter, he said when he reached her, I understand you have been teaching, holding gatherings, showing people your system. I have. I heard about the church meeting. 11 families, they say, planning to build hidden storage. Another dozen considering it. Something like that. Brenner's jaw tightened. You could have sold this knowledge, he said. You could have come to me. We could have worked together, patented the design, licensed it, charged for consultations. A system like this, after a winter like the one we just had, people would pay anything for safety. I do not want payment. Then you are a fool. His voice was harsh, but there was something underneath it, not anger, Clara realized, but fear. You give away what has value. You make yourself worthless when you could make yourself rich. I'm not worthless. My children are alive. My neighbors are learning. That is worth something. Worth something to them. Worth nothing to you. Brenner stepped closer. You think you are helping these people. You are not. You are making them dependent on charity, your knowledge, your time. And when you run out of time, when you need money for seed or repairs or medicine, they will not help you. They will take what you gave them and forget where it came from. Clara met his eyes. You are describing yourself, she said. Not them. Not me. Brenner's face went still. I came to offer you a partnership, he said. A real one. Formalized. I would handle the business side, the marketing, the pricing, the distribution of materials. You would teach. We would both profit. No. You have not heard the terms. I do not need to hear them. The knowledge is not mine to sell. It belongs to Moens, and Moens is dead. It belongs to Ade, who taught me how to use it. It belongs to everyone who needs it to survive. That is not how the world works. It is how my world works. You are standing in it. Brenner looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not surrender, but the recognition that this particular battle was lost. You will regret this, he said. When winter comes again, and people start asking questions you cannot answer, when the system fails and someone blames you, when you need something I could have provided and it is no longer available, perhaps, but I will regret it on my own terms. She turned and walked into her house. Behind her, Brenner stood in the mud for a long moment before finally turning back toward town. Spring deepened into early summer, and Torbjörn Idea began to slow. Clara noticed it first in the mornings, the way he moved more stiffly when rising from his pallet, the way he paused before climbing steps that had not troubled him in winter. His bad leg, which had always dragged slightly, now seemed to resist movement entirely by midday. It is age, he said when she asked. The cold went deep in January. It does not come out. You should see the doctor in town. The doctor will tell me what I already know, that I am 67 years old and have spent those years building houses in cold country, that my body has absorbed more winters than it was made to hold. He smiled. There is no cure for that, only management. Then manage. Rest more. Let me handle the visits, the teaching. The teaching is what keeps me moving. Heidi settled into the chair by the stove, a chair Clara had built for him during the worst of the blizzard, when he needed a place to sit that was not the floor. If I stop teaching, I stop thinking. If I stop thinking, he shrugged. I have seen what happens to old men who stop thinking. Clara did not argue, but she watched him more carefully after that, noting the days when his color was bad, the evenings when he could not finish his food. The disagreement came in June. A family from the far edge of the settlement, the Hendricksons, recent arrivals from Minnesota, had asked for help planning their winter preparation. Their claim shanty was small, poorly built, sited in a low area that would drift badly in any storm. I'd wanted to rebuild the entire structure. Start from the foundation, he said. What they have cannot be improved. It must be replaced. Clara disagreed. They do not have the resources to rebuild. They barely have the resources to survive until harvest. If we tell them to start over, they will have nothing. If we tell them to patch what is broken, They will die when the wind finds the patches. Then we prioritize. We seal the worst gaps. We build one hidden bay, small, but enough for emergency fuel. We get them through one winter, and then what? They will have one winter of false confidence. They will believe they have solved the problem when they have only delayed it. They will be alive to solve it properly. Edie's face darkened. Clara had never seen him angry before, frustrated, impatient, demanding, but not angry. I watched a boy die because I taught him he could survive anything with enough preparation, he said. I will not make that mistake again. I will not tell people they are ready when they are not. You are not telling them they are ready. You are giving them a chance. A chance to believe a lie. A chance to live. Clara's voice rose. You speak of the boy who died as if his death was your fault. It was not. The storm killed him. The storm that came so fast no one could prepare for it. You gave him knowledge. You gave him tools. What happened after was not in your control. Ide was silent. We cannot control whether people survive, Clara said more quietly. We can only control what we offer them. And what we are offering is not a guarantee. It is a possibility, a better chance than they had before. That is not enough. It is all anyone has. It is all you gave me. The silence stretched. The Hendricksons need help this week, Clara said finally. I will go to them tomorrow. I will assess what can be done with what they have. If you want to come, you are welcome. If not, she paused. If not, I will do what I can alone. She walked out of the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Ide shift in his chair, but he did not follow. Clara went to the Hendricksons alone the next morning. She walked the 6 miles in cool dawn light, arriving before the family had finished breakfast. They were young, the husband perhaps 25, the wife younger, a baby not yet walking, and they looked at Clara with the wary hope of people who knew they were in trouble and did not know how to ask for help. The shanty was worse than Clara had expected. The walls were thin, single-board construction with gaps she could see daylight through. The roof leaked. The floor was packed earth that would turn to mud in any thaw. But there was also possibility. One wall, the north face, was better built than the others, doubled for some reason Clara could not determine. The stove was sound, small, but functional, and the family had energy, the desperate energy of people who understood their situation. We can work with this, Clara said. She spent 3 days with the Hendricksons. She showed them how to seal gaps with mud and straw paste. She helped them frame a small storage bay against the north wall, not deep, but enough for 2 weeks of emergency fuel. She taught the wife the rationing rhythm while the husband cut and stacked the wood they would hide inside. When she returned to her own house on the 4th day, Ade was waiting on the porch. He looked older than he had when she left. Smaller. His bad leg was elevated on a crate, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the chair arms. I was wrong, he said before she could speak, about the Hendricksons, about what they could do with what they have. Clara sat down on the step. You were not wrong about the danger. Their shanty is poorly built. One bad storm, and they will struggle. But they will struggle with a better chance than they had before. Yes. Ade was quiet for a moment. I have been afraid, he said, since the boy died, since 79. I have been afraid that teaching people to prepare is the same as teaching them to be careless, that confidence kills as surely as cold. Sometimes it does. But the alternative, telling them they cannot prepare, that nothing will help, that kills too, in a different way. Clara nodded. I have spent 9 years paralyzed by that fear. Ide continued. 9 years refusing to teach because I was afraid of what teaching might cause. And then you appeared, and you did not give me a choice. You asked questions that had answers, and I could not stop myself from answering them. That is not a failure. No. He smiled, and the expression was tired but real. It is not. It is, I do not know what it is, but it is not failure. Clara reached over and took his hand. The skin was papery, the bones prominent beneath. Thank you, she said, for teaching me, for teaching all of them. Thank you for not letting me stop. They sat together on the porch as the sun climbed toward noon, saying nothing more. Torbjörn Ide died in early September. He went quietly in the night, without warning. Clara found him in the morning when she came to check on him. She had taken to letting him sleep in the kitchen since his leg made the walk to town too difficult. He was still in his chair, his eyes closed, his face peaceful. She sat with him for a long time before she went for help. The burial was small. The pastor from the church in town said words over the grave. Elias Rusk attended, and Anna Mikkelsen, and a handful of others who had learned from Heidi over the past months. The Hendricksons came, though the husband had to borrow a neighbor's cart to make the journey. After the service, Clara walked back to her house alone. The children were with Anna for the day, and the silence was absolute. She stood in the kitchen where Adi had taught her to count fuel, where he had shown her the difference between oak and hickory, between maintenance burning and storm burning, where he had sat in the chair she built, stretching his bad leg toward the stove, talking about the boy who died in '79 and the fear that had followed him ever since. The chair was empty now. The stove was cold. The walls held their hidden fuel, waiting for a winter that Heidi would never see. Clara crossed to the north wall and ran her hand along the paneling. She could feel the wood beneath, not the finished surface, but the stored energy, the prepared future, the knowledge made physical. I will keep teaching, she said aloud, to the empty room, to the walls, to whatever remained of the man who had made her survival possible. I will not let them stop learning. The silence held. The house did not answer. But Clara felt in that moment something settle in her chest. Not peace. Peace was too simple a word for what she felt, but resolution, purpose. The understanding that grief did not end the work. It only changed who carried it forward. If this story has taught you something about preparation, about the difference between waiting for help and building it yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The lessons that saved Clara and her children are lessons that still matter. The secondary crisis came 3 weeks after Edie's death. A family Clara had never met, the Lindstroms, a day's ride northwest, sent word through Anna Mikkelsen that their newborn was sick and their house was failing. The father had broken his arm in a fall, and the mother was alone with the baby and 2 older children, watching the autumn cold creep closer with no way to prepare. They need help, Anna said. Real help, not just advice. Clara looked at her children. Marta was 8 now, capable and steady. Ole was nearly 5, old enough to stay with neighbors for a few days. I will go, she said. You cannot go alone. The Lindstrom place is 20 miles. The roads are poor. If something happens, then I will handle it. Clara pulled her coat from the hook. The way I have handled everything else. Anna did not argue further. The Lindstrom house was worse than the Hendrickson shanty. The building itself was sound, a proper frame structure, not a claim shack, but the fuel situation was desperate. The father, Eric Lindstrom, lay in the bedroom with his arm splinted, unable to cut or stack or haul. The mother, Ingrid, had been burning furniture to keep the baby warm. The older children, a boy of 9 and a girl of 7, had dark circles under their eyes from fear and exhaustion. We had wood, Ingrid said, her voice flat with defeat. Before Eric's arm, 3 cords stacked behind the house. But the rain came last week, and the stack was not covered, and now? Show me. The woodpile was a disaster. Wet through, frozen in places, already beginning to rot at the bottom. Perhaps half a cord remained usable. The rest was waste. Clara assessed the situation. No time to season new fuel. No way to dry what remained. The baby's cough was real and worsening, and the cold was coming. She thought of Idy. What would he say? What would he do? We build a drying station, she said, inside the house. Ingrid stared at her. You cannot dry wood inside a house. The smoke, the moisture. We are not drying green wood. We are finishing wood that is already mostly dry. We need heat, airflow, and time. Clara looked around the main room. We build a rack near the stove. We rotate the least wet splits onto the rack. We burn what is dry, and we warm what is wet until it becomes dry. It is not ideal, but it is possible. How do you know? Because I watched my teacher work through problems he had never seen before. Because he taught me to think, not just to copy. Clara met Ingrid's eyes. I do not have all the answers, but I have some. And some is better than none. They worked for 3 days. Clara organized the salvageable wood by moisture content using the knock and ring test Edie had taught her. The driest pieces went to immediate burning. The dampest went to a corner where they could not contaminate the rest. The middle grades went onto the rack she built near the stove. The older children helped. The boy, Anders, was strong for his age and eager to be useful. The girl, Elin, had a careful eye and learned to sort faster than Clara expected. By the 3rd day, the rotation was working. Dry wood fed the stove. Damp wood warmed on the rack. The baby's cough was no worse. The house was holding temperature. You saved us, Ingrid said when Clara prepared to leave. I showed you a system. You saved yourselves. Clara pulled on her coat. Keep the rotation going. Grade everything that comes in. Do not burn wet wood. It wastes heat and creates creosote. If Eric's arm heals before winter settles, build a covered shelter for your outdoor stack. Next year you will not be in this position. Next year. Ingrid laughed, but there was no humor in it. I am not sure I believe in next year. Believe anyway. That is all any of us can do. Clara walked out into the cold autumn air and began the long journey home. The news of her work at the Lindstrom place spread faster than Clara expected. By the time she returned to her own house, 2 more families had left messages asking for help. A third appeared at her door the following morning, a young couple with a baby and no idea how to prepare for their first Dakota winter. Clara taught them. She taught all of them. She drew Idy's diagrams from memory. She repeated his lessons about grading and rationing. She walked homesteads and calculated loads and showed people how to build access panels that would seal tight against the draft. And as the autumn deepened, as the first snow fell and melted and fell again, she realized something had changed. People were coming to her. Not to Edie. Edie was gone. Not to Rusk. Rusk knew buildings, but he had never lived through what Clara had lived through. They came to her because she had survived the blizzard, because she had taught others to survive, because when the worst winter in memory had tried to kill her children, she had held the walls together and outlasted it. She was no longer the widow who had been thrown out by her husband's brothers. She was no longer the desperate woman who had bought an $8 ruin and discovered miracle wood inside its walls. She was the woman who taught people how not to freeze. It was not the life she had imagined when she arrived in Dakota Territory with 2 trunks and a dead man's legacy. It was not the life anyone would have predicted for a Norwegian widow with no money and no connections and no formal training in anything that mattered. But it was her life. And she had built it, the way Moens had built the walls, carefully, deliberately, one piece at a time, until something that should not have held together became strong enough to save. The hostile skeptic cracked in late October. Silas Brenner came to Clara's house on a day when the wind had teeth and the first hard freeze was threatening. He came alone, without announcement, and stood at her door with an expression she had never seen on his face before. "I need your help," he said. Clara waited. "The Petersons, a family 3 miles south of town. I sold them fuel last spring, green wood, not properly seasoned. I told them it would dry by winter." His voice was flat. "It has not dried. They have a pile of wet timber and no way to heat their house." "That is their problem." "It is my problem. I sold them the wood. I took their money. If they freeze—" He stopped. "If they freeze, everyone will know why." Clara studied him. The fine coat was gone, replaced by practical wool. The polished boots were scuffed and muddy. Something had changed in Silas Brenner since the spring, something that went deeper than business. "You care," she said. "I do not care. I am protecting my interests." "You came here instead of trying to fix it yourself. You came to the woman you told was a fool for giving knowledge away." Clara shook her head. "You care. You just do not know how to say it." Brenner's jaw tightened. "Will you help them or not?" Clara thought of Idy, of the boy who froze in '79, of the fear that had paralyzed a good man for 9 years because he could not forgive himself for a death he did not cause. "I will help them," she said, "but you are coming with me, and you are going to learn what I teach them, because next time you will be the one who fixes it." Brenner looked as if he wanted to argue, but something in his face shifted, not surrender, but recognition. "Fine," he said. "Show me what you know." They walked out into the cold together. The Peterson house was small and poorly sited, built in a hollow where snow would drift 8 feet deep in any serious storm. Clara saw the problem before she reached the door. The family had stacked their fuel in the lowest point of the yard, where meltwater collected and moisture crept upward through the pile. "You sold them this?" she said to Brenner. "I sold them timber. Where they stacked it was their decision. And you did not tell them that green wood needs airflow, that wet ground rots the bottom layers, that a pile in a hollow will be buried before Christmas." Brenner said nothing. The Petersons themselves were a young couple, perhaps 22 and 19, with a baby not yet 6 months old. They looked at Clara and Brenner with the desperate hope of people who had realized too late that they did not know what they were doing. "We thought it would dry," the husband said. "His name was Carl. We thought the summer sun would take the moisture out." "Summer sun dries the surface. The core stays wet." Clara walked to the wood pile and pulled a split from the middle. When she rapped her knuckles against it, the sound was dull. Dead. "This will not burn hot. It will smoke, create creosote, and give you half the heat of properly seasoned fuel." "Then what do we do?" Clara looked at Brenner. "Tell them." Brenner's face tightened, but he had agreed to learn, and learning meant admitting what he did not know. "I do not know," he said. The words seemed to cost him something. "I sold timber. I did not teach people how to use it." "Then watch." Clara spent 4 hours at the Peterson house. She taught them the same drying rotation she had used at the Lindstrom place, rack near the stove, careful grading by moisture content, burning only what would burn clean. She showed them how to test wood by sound and weight. She explained the rationing rhythm, the day count system, the difference between maintenance fuel and storm fuel. Brenner watched. He asked questions, grudging at first, then more openly as the system revealed itself. By the time Clara finished, his expression had changed from skepticism to something closer to respect. "This is what you have been teaching," he said. "All those families, all those gatherings." "This is what Idy taught me." I'm passing it forward. Why? Clara looked at the Peterson baby, sleeping in a cradle near the stove, small and fragile and utterly dependent on adults who had not known what they were doing until today. Because no one taught them before me. Because if I do not teach them, some of them will die. Because, she paused. Because I remember what it felt like to stand in an empty woodshed with 2 children and no idea how to survive. Brenner was quiet for a long moment. I could have helped them, he said finally. When I sold the timber, I could have told them how to stack it, where to place it, what to expect. Instead, I took their money and left. Yes, that was wrong. Clara did not disagree. You can change it, she said. Not what you did, but what you do next. Every person you sell fuel to from now on, you can teach them. 5 minutes of instruction. The difference between a pile that rots and a pile that burns. I am a businessman. I am not a teacher. You are whatever you choose to be. That is the only thing any of us control. She walked out into the cold, leaving Brenner standing in the Peterson kitchen with an expression she could not read. The change in Silas Brenner was not immediate, but it was real. Over the following weeks, Clara heard reports from neighbors who had visited his lumberyard. Brenner had started asking questions. Where will you stack this? Do you have cover? Have you thought about airflow? He had printed a small sheet of instructions and handed it to every customer who bought fuel. He did not apologize for the green wood he had sold in past years. He did not admit publicly that his business practices had contributed to suffering. But he changed. And change, Clara had learned, mattered more than confession. By December, Brenner had become an unlikely ally. He directed customers to Clara when they needed more than instructions could provide. He donated surplus lumber for the storage bays that families were building throughout the settlement. He never acknowledged that she had been right and he had been wrong, but his actions said what his words would not. He fears you, Anna Mickelson said one afternoon when Clara mentioned the shift. He does not fear me. He fears what you represent, the woman who gave away what he tried to sell, the proof that generosity can build more than greed. Anna smiled. That is a kind of fear, the fear of being shown what you could have been if you had made different choices. Clara thought about this. I do not want him to fear me. I want him to help people. Those are not opposites. Sometimes fear is what makes people finally start helping. The winter of 1888 to 89 was hard, but not catastrophic. 3 families that Clara had taught lost fuel to poor management. One family, the Hendricksons, whose shanty she had patched the previous summer, came within days of running out before a neighbor brought emergency supply. 2 children in the settlement died of illness that might or might not have been related to cold, but no one froze. No one died in a blizzard. The lessons of January 1888 had taken root, and the community that emerged from the second winter was different from the one that had entered it. Clara counted the houses she had touched, directly or indirectly. 37. 37 families who had built some version of the system, who had learned the grading and the rationing and the rhythm. Some had done it well. Some had done it poorly. But all of them had done something, and something was better than nothing. You are building a network, Elias Rusk said when she shared the count with him. Not just teaching individuals. You're creating a web of knowledge that will outlast you. Aid built the knowledge. I am just the messenger. Aid is dead. The knowledge lives because you carry it. Rusk looked at her with something like admiration. You are not the widow who bought a ruin anymore. You are something else. What? I do not know, but it matters. Nels Arneson arrived in the settlement in March of 1889. He came from Minnesota, following the same path so many had followed, the promise of land, the hope of a new start. But unlike most who arrived in Dakota Territory, Nels came with skills that were immediately useful. He was a blacksmith by trade, trained in Norway before emigrating, and his hands knew how to shape metal the way Clara's hands had learned to shape wood. She met him at the livery stable, where he had set up a temporary forge while looking for a permanent location. He was perhaps 35, broad-shouldered, with the quiet competence of someone who had worked with dangerous materials long enough to respect them. "Mrs. Halversdatter," he said when Anna Mikkelsen introduced them. "I have heard your name." "From whom?" "From everyone. The woman who teaches people how to survive winter. The woman who turned an abandoned house into something that saved lives." He smiled. "The stories may be exaggerated. They are not." "Then I would like to see what you built, if you are willing to show me." Clara studied him. There was no greed in his expression, no calculation, just the honest curiosity of someone who appreciated good work. "Come tomorrow," she said. "Before noon. Bring your measuring tools." He came. The tour of Clara's house took longer than she expected. Nels did not simply look, he examined. He measured the depth of the storage bays with a folding rule. He tested the access panels, noting how the fitted board seated against the frame. He asked questions about load distribution, about moisture barriers, about fire clearance between the hidden wood and the stove. "Muntz was clever," he said when they finished. "But he was also lucky. These bays are within inches of being too deep for the frame to carry. If he had packed them tighter, the wall might have bowed. 80 checked the loads when he taught me. He said Moens had doubled the joists where needed." "He did. I can see the extra framing through the gaps." Nels ran his hand along the access panel on the west wall. "But the hardware is wrong. These friction fit covers will work for a few seasons, but eventually the wood will shrink and the seal will fail. You need metal hinges, proper brackets to hold the tension." "Metal costs money I do not have." "Metal is what I make." He looked at her. "I could build you hardware, hinges that pivot properly, latches that seal tight. In exchange for what?" "In exchange for teaching me the system. I have a forge. People will come to me for repairs, for tools, for hardware. If I understand what they need for winter preparation, I can provide it. Not for profit." He paused. "Not only for profit, for usefulness." Clara considered. "You want to join the teaching?" "I want to contribute. There is a difference." "Is there?" Nels smiled. It was a careful smile, respectful of boundaries. "Perhaps not, but I would like to find out." The partnership developed slowly, through work rather than words. Nels built hinges for Clara's access panels, proper iron hardware that seated cleanly and held tight against the frame. She showed him the rationing system, the grading protocol, the rhythm of feeding a stove through the longest nights. He asked questions that revealed a mind accustomed to solving problems through materials and measurements. By summer, they were working together regularly. Nels repaired tools for the families Clara taught. Clara explained the principles behind the repairs, connecting mechanical function to survival need. They were not a couple, not yet, but they were collaborators, two people whose skills complemented rather than competed. "People are talking," Anna said one day in July. "People always talk." "They talk because they see something, you and the blacksmith, working together, walking together. We are colleagues. You are something. The question is what?" Anna looked at her. "You are allowed to be happy, Clara. You are allowed to want something for yourself." Clara did not answer, but she thought about it for days afterward. The courtship, when it finally began, was practical rather than romantic. Nels asked Clara to walk with him after church one Sunday in August. They walked along the creek that ran south of town, not touching, not speaking of feelings. They spoke of work, the projects they were building, the families they were helping, the winter that would come again soon. My husband died 2 years ago, she said. I loved him. I still miss him. I know. I cannot promise to love you the same way. I cannot promise that what I feel will match what you feel. I am not asking for promises. I am asking for the chance to work beside you. Nels stopped walking and faced her. We are both alone. We both have skills. Together, we could build something larger than either of us could build separately. If that is all it ever is, partnership, collaboration, shared labor, that would be enough. And if it becomes more, then it becomes more. I would not refuse it. He smiled. But I do not require it. I require only honesty. Can you give me that? Clara thought of Heidi, who had taught her by refusing to stop when she asked questions, of Anna, who had brought eggs and demanded knowledge in return, of the dozens of families who had learned from her not because she was brilliant, but because she was willing. Yes, she said, I can give you that. They walked back toward town together, and something between them had shifted. The wedding took place in October of 1889. It was a small ceremony held in the church where Clara had given her first public teaching. The pastor who had married Clara and Leif 8 years before performed the service again, his words simple and direct. Marta, now 8, stood beside her mother in a dress made from fabric Anna had given as a wedding gift. Ole, not yet 6, squirmed in the pew and had to be held by a neighbor. Elias Rusk attended, though he said nothing. Silas Brenner was not there. He had sent a note wishing them well, signed formally, without warmth but without resentment. After the ceremony, Clara and Nels walked back to the house that Moens had built, that Heidi had taught her to use, that she had survived a blizzard in. This is home now, she said, for both of us. I know. Nels looked at the walls, the roof, the thin curl of smoke from the chimney. I will build a forge beside the woodshed, a proper one, close enough to help when you need it, far enough to keep the sparks away. And the teaching? The teaching continues. That is what you built. I would not take it from you. Clara nodded. Then let us begin. The years that followed compressed themselves into patterns. Winters came and went. The teaching expanded, first to the immediate settlement, then to neighboring townships, then to families a day's ride distant who had heard the stories and wanted to learn. Clara traveled when she could and taught visitors when she could not. Nels built hardware that became standard in the region, hinges and latches and brackets designed specifically for access panels and storage bays. Marta grew into a capable young woman who learned the system as thoroughly as Clara had learned it from Ide. She began teaching others before she was 15, explaining the rationing rhythm to farm wives who struggled with numbers, demonstrating the knock and ring test to children who had never heard it before. Ole grew more slowly, but he grew. He never had his sister's aptitude for teaching, but he had patience, and patience was its own kind of gift. He helped Nels in the forge, learning to shape metal, and eventually he built access hardware himself, not as elegantly as his stepfather, but functionally, reliably. A third child came, a daughter named Torbjörn after the man who had made everything possible. She was born in the house Moens built, in the room Clara had survived the blizzard in, and from her first breath she knew the warmth of walls that worked. Brenner's final conversion came in the winter of 1892. Clara had not seen him in months. He had retreated from public life after a business dispute, something about debts and failed speculation, and the lumberyard had passed to other hands. The man who had once threatened Clara with credit and leverage now lived in a small house on the edge of town, alone, except for a housekeeper who came twice weekly. She learned he was ill through Anna, who learned it through the pastor. A cough that would not clear, a fever that came and went, the signs of consumption, perhaps, or simply the accumulation of years spent indoors with sawdust and account books. Clara went to see him. His house was cold when she arrived, not dangerously cold, but colder than it should have been. The stove was burning low, and the fuel basket beside it held only a few splits of uncertain quality. "Mrs. Arneson," Brenner said when she entered. He had aged badly since she last saw him. His fine features had gone sharp, and his hands trembled when he moved them. "I did not expect you. I came to check your fuel situation." "My fuel situation." He laughed, and the sound rattled in his chest. "I sold fuel for 15 years. I know my fuel situation." "You know fuel. You do not know how to use it." Clara walked to the stove and examined the fire. "You are burning wet wood. The creosote buildup must be considerable. The chimney sweep comes in spring. The chimney will catch fire before spring if you continue like this." She spent 2 hours in Brenner's house. She cleaned the stove, cleared what creosote she could reach, restacked his fuel supply by grade. She showed him the rationing rhythm, the same rhythm she had shown dozens of families over the past 4 years, and explained why it mattered. Brenner watched without speaking. When she finished, he sat in his chair by the stove and looked at her with something in his eyes that she had never seen before. "I tried to take what you had," he said. "I tried to control it, to profit from it." "I know. You helped me anyway. You are a person who is cold. That is the only thing that matters right now." Brenner was quiet for a long moment. "I was wrong about you," he said finally. "Not about the business. I still think you could have made money from what you knew, but about what you were building. I thought it was foolishness, charity that would exhaust itself. But it has not exhausted itself. It has grown. It has outlasted me. It has outlasted Ida. It has outlasted Moens. It will outlast me too." Clara pulled on her coat. "That is the point, not to own the knowledge, to let it spread until no one remembers where it started. And what do you get from it? I get to live in a community where children do not freeze. That is enough." She walked out into the winter afternoon, leaving Brenner alone with a properly managed fire and the silence of his empty house. The spring of 1894 brought Clara's 50th year and the end of a chapter. Elias Rusk died in his sleep in March, quietly, without fanfare. He had never built hidden storage himself. His house was sound and his supply was adequate, but he had helped dozens of families implement what Clara taught. His carpentry skills, applied to access panels and storage bays, had made possible what Clara's teaching alone could not. Anna Mickelson moved west with her husband that same spring, following the promise of better land in Montana Territory. She left behind the storage bay that Clara had helped her design 5 years before, the first of its kind in the settlement, and a letter thanking Clara for everything. "You taught me to think like a carpenter," the letter said, "when I had never held a hammer in my life. That is not a small gift." Brenner died in summer. His estate, such as it was, went to a nephew in Minnesota. The lumberyard that had made him prosperous passed through 3 more owners before Clara lost track of it. And the house Moens built, the house that had been abandoned for $8 and back taxes, stood exactly where it had always stood, its walls still hiding the fuel that had saved Clara and her children nearly 7 years before. The hidden bays were almost empty now. Over the years, Clara had burned most of what Moens had stored, replacing it with her own supply, maintaining the system even as the original cache depleted. The wood she burned in the winter of 1894 was wood Nels had cut, and she had graded and Marta had stacked according to the protocols that Heidi had established decades ago in another country. The system had outlived its creator. The knowledge had outlived its teacher. And Clara had outlived the woman who had arrived in this house with 2 children, 2 trunks, and $8, believing she would not see Christmas. By the winter of 1895, 43 families in the settlement and surrounding townships had built some version of the hidden fuel system. Another 22 had implemented partial measures, the rationing rhythm, the grating protocol, the ceiling curtains that trapped warm air near the floor. The children who had learned from Clara in the church gathering of 1888 were adults now, teaching their own neighbors, carrying the knowledge outward in circles that expanded faster than Clara could track. One specific detail remained constant across all the variations. Every family called the knock test the Ide test, though most had never met the man who invented it. Clara lived out her remaining years in the house on the old Moen's claim, never moving, never selling. She continued teaching until her 60s, when her eyes began to fail and the long walks to distant homesteads became impossible. Nels died in 1901, quietly, of a heart that simply stopped. Marta married a farmer from the next county and bore 3 children who learned the system before they learned to read. Ole moved to town and worked as a harness maker, visiting his mother on Sundays, always checking the fuel supply before he left. Clara died in the winter of 1907, aged 63, in the room where she had survived the children's blizzard. Her hands were folded over her chest, and beside her bed, stacked neatly against the wall, was an armload of dry hickory, enough for one more day. On January 12th of that year, 19 years to the day after the blizzard that had tested everything, the temperature in Dakota had dropped again, 32 degrees in 6 hours, a killing cold that arrived without warning. Elias Rusk had stood in Clara's doorway in the weeks after her arrival and told her that if she stayed with those children and no fuel, she would be warming them once more by morning and then not again. He had been wrong. Clara Vangen Halvorsdatter Arneson had warmed her children through that night and 1,000 nights after, and the warmth had spread through the walls, through the families, through the generations that carried her teaching forward into winters she would never see. The men who measured that farmhouse from the yard had seen a ruin. Clara measured it from the cold inward and found a winter already waiting.